Those three big miners. What about Bob Brown's comments this week about 83% of the profits going offshore, being owned offshore? I thought it was hilarious. You had Twiggy over in Perth at the same time saying, if you put this tax in, 100% will go offshore. Then, of course, when the coalition and everyone attacked Bob Brown for being xenophobic, Twiggy backpedalled on that. Nothing wrong with the foreigners, nothing wrong with them at all.
It's about time Bob Brown learned some history, going right back. The Australian mining industry historically has always been financed by overseas investors. You mentioned Twiggy. Twiggy got Fortescue off the ground when two gentlemen in New York, Ian Cumming and Joseph Steinberg, said we'll take 4% of your revenue as a royalty bond and we'll put money in the equity. And Twiggy went on the back of that and raised billions and billions because there was credibility. Sorry, Bob Brown's comments really over the last few days have not been constructive in any shape or form. He really needs to go back and look at history. We've had to basically finance our mining effort from overseas. We always will. And
I noticed everybody's backing off. Senator Cormann got very upset last night that I suggested he had called them foreign-owned. Obviously, I was in a panel where passions were running high. He must have been the only person on the panel in Perth, Clive Palmer, leading the charge. Bitterness against the foreign miners, especially these three. And I remember taking Clive Palmer to task, saying, surely, I mean, you know, Xstrata, we know, Swiss-based, don't like tax. Rio should be CRA, British-owned. But BHP, to me, is still Australian. These whackers, a lot of them in Perth and Clive, claim they're foreign-owned. Vile,
well, I think BHP is largely... I think it actually largely is non-Australian owned, but ultimately it's listed in Australia. It pays corporate tax in Australia, employs Australians. Now, Clive Palmer was going to list on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, backed by
Chinese... Oh yeah, he'll
Chinese...
take the foreign money if he wants.
Yeah, well, because nobody here will put money in his company, but and that's fine. Yeah. But I don't think we should delineate between foreign and overseas owned companies. As long as there's no transfer pricing issues going on and profits being shifted offshore. But if
music to end.
Don't forget, Janine, one of the great issues about foreign-owned miners, Xstrata, the best deal Xstrata did was to buy MIM off Australian shareholders at the bottom of the market at a ridiculous price.
Don't speak to me, Xstrata, major shareholder Glencore, Mark Rich, you know, and they're based in Switzerland. They've never met a tax they like. Let's get to something else that was I think the biggest story of the week. Federal court ruling on the Centro directors. We've talked about it on this show. The evidence that came out in court on what they didn't know or turned a blind eye to was extraordinary, as John Stewart used to say. I thought it was a very good judgment. As he pointed out, he hasn't raised the bar for directors. He just pointed out what the bar is. And it would be, you have to be financially literate, as the AFR headline said. What do you make of it? You've read the...
I've actually read the 589 paragraphs of the judgment. It's actually a really good piece of work, well worth reading if you've got a few hours. I believe Centro is a very, very specific case because the situation Centro is in at the time, it had just made a major acquisition a few months before. It had grown basically property on its balance sheet and off from 10 billion to 26 billion in 18 months. Its business model was to buy, using short-term finance, then refinance. Now, honestly, if you're a director of a company where that's the business model and your key thing when you look at the accounts is not to say, hey guys, what's our debt maturity profile look like across the group? And that's really, if you actually look at it, what Justice Middleton, one of the key things he focuses on.
And you're a director, you've been a director, you are a director, you're going to be a director. I am staggered sometimes to see, I mean, 99% of directors, I think, are hard-working, good, competent people, but some of the big profile, I mean, there's the odd one who says, I boast that they're a bit lazy, that I don't read the board papers. I mean, James Hardie wasn't an isolated case, was it?
Well, let's go back to Centro. I'm also the chairman of an audit committee as well, which is interesting because the role of the audit committee I don't think has been examined that closely. It probably will be when we get to class action cases on Centro. But it's quite clear, for example, Centro's CFO was off ill for a period of time when this was all going on. There was a backup CFO. The backup CFO, and it's in the judgment, changed his mind twice about whether this debt was short-term, then it became long-term, then he thought it might be short-term again. It's all there in the judgment. It's quite clear to me when you look at Centro at the time, look at the stuff they put out, it was all about growth, asset acquisition at the time, and I think they were just trying to push the envelope a little bit.
I think they were. And what do you make of it?
Yeah, it was an interesting case. You feel a little bit sorry for the Centro directors in one sense, because it's almost like I compare it in Crikey to the drunk driver. A lot of people get behind the wheel drunk and make it home and don't injure anybody, and they've committed exactly the same crime as somebody who runs over a pedestrian.
They've broken the law, haven't they? Even if you don't hit someone.
They haven't been caught though. There's a lot of directors out there who probably aren't paying enough attention to balance sheets and financials, and the companies haven't collapsed, so we don't know. With Centro, the company happened to collapse 4 months later, so everybody's quickly, all the
yeah, because there were a lot of people
through.
at that time, and other property companies, I reckon their boards wouldn't have passed the sniff test.
I can give you Allco Finance Group, who did almost exactly the same thing. They had a $1 billion reclassification in 07, perhaps 07, exactly the same. Didn't have enough current liabilities. They had to restate their reports a few months later. I haven't seen ASIC take any action against Allco, against David Coe and Rod Eddington and several other high-profile directors.
But then on the other hand, to be fair to ASIC, because we kicked them all the time, this was a good win for them, a much-needed win, wasn't it?
Oh, it certainly was, and good on them for doing it. I think they should be doing a few more of these. There's a lot of companies out there that have collapsed, and I think the only person criminally charged out of the GFC wrap-up has been Eddie Groves over a $3 million purchase of childcare centres to Martin Kemp.
Yeah, and all co-directors keep popping up on other boards, don't they?
Well, I think Rod's off most. I think Teflon Rod's pretty much gone from everything. He lost the ANZ chairmanship. Barbara might be on Qantas.
David Coe's
Bob Mansfield
was with the Klinghorn one.
I think Coe's pretty much off. He's got private interests, and he actually recently sold V8 supercars.
Centro's fascinating because it's all there on the public record. You can see it. Go to the ASX website, look at CNP, which was the code, look at the Centro Properties balance sheet issued on the 8th of August 2007, and then go look at the concise balance sheet issued to the market on the 17th of September 2007 for CNP. If you can spot the similarities, please give Janine a call. You won't get any calls, Janine.
Adam, it's interesting. The Institute of Directors, a number of directors came out going, oh, you know, this is going to stop people. What was it, a rush for the exits, which the judgment said it actually won't. I thought it was the opposite. There's all these women and people trying to get on boards. Good directors have nothing to fear from this, do they?
You wouldn't have thought. Interestingly, if you look at the lineup of Centro directors, they're a pretty high-profile bunch, or certainly a well-credentialed bunch. I think Jim Hall was on the board of about 5 different companies. If you go through them, haven't been Avesco and Centro, and there's a bunch of companies that are down, Connect East, I think. So there's quite a few not so well-performing companies. Paul Cooper's on the board of a couple of different companies. He's chairman of Centro. Another interesting point to note about Centro is Paul Cooper and Jim Hall remain on the board. And they actually have had their directors' fees virtually doubled because they're now being paid for Centro Retail and Centro Properties in the last year. So despite this finding, they're actually still being paid by Centro and actually have had a doubling of their directors' fees in the past year, which is somewhat unusual.
I actually pay fees to the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and I have to say I thought their reaction was absolutely hysterical.
Overwrought.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that's interesting, because I don't like to bash the directors. As I said, most of them are good, hard-working people.
Absolutely.
But I think it is for this, the push by women to get in, you actually do need some financial fundamentals, and this isn't about networking or what looks good on your CV. There's a lot of responsibility.
There are responsibilities, but if you do your homework properly and you use some common sense and ask the right questions, then quite frankly, you've got plenty to add to boards and you've got nothing to be frightened about.
And for once, Adam, we can't be blamed. This wasn't the financial press doing this, was it?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Lovely to have you up here. Look forward to talking to you again from Melbourne. Andrew, we'll see you again regularly. Time for a quick